I was 12 the first time I heard about Room 3B's third stall. You'd think it would be one of those throwaway dares, middle school kids inventing legends to scare each other. But this story had rules. It had witnesses, and it had a name. The Girl in the Grate. They say she only appears in the third floor girls' bathroom, third stall, only during third period. That was the hook. Simple, controlled, like someone had designed it, with just enough room for doubt to keep the story alive, but not enough for escape once you stepped in. I wasn't even supposed to be up there that morning. Our science teacher, Mr. Hall, had left us with a worksheet and stepped out to check on the lab. So naturally, the class devolved into whispering paper footballs and rapid-fire dares. One of the loudest voices belonged to Cammie Adler, queen of exactly one detention away from suspension. Cammie leaned over my desk, eyes lit like a match just before it hits the flame. "Bet you won't do it," she said. "Do what?" "Go upstairs. Bathroom, third stall, third floor." I laughed. "That's not even—" "Wait, the haunted one?" Cammie nodded. "Only takes 1 minute. Just go in, lock the door, and listen. If nothing happens, you win. And if something does," Cammie smiled, "you'll know." It was stupid. It was, but the whole room had turned to watch us now. A bet in front of half the grade. Backing down wasn't an option. The third floor hallway felt abandoned. It always did. Ever since the new wing opened, the district locked most of the old rooms up here. They left the lights on, but the air still felt stale, like a place that had decided not to be alive anymore. The bathroom door groaned when I opened it, like it hadn't moved in weeks. Inside, 3 stalls, off-white tile, flickering fluorescent light. The third stall waited, plain, closed, but not locked. I remember checking my watch, 10:29 a.m., third period. Perfect timing. I stepped in, closed the door behind me, and flipped the lock. It slid shut with a clack that felt a little too final. At first, there was nothing. No sounds, no pipes, not even the usual hum of the hallway outside. Then I heard it, a soft, slow, dragging sound, like fingers, wet fingers, pulling themselves across tile. It came from under the stall next to mine. My breath caught. I crouched, looked under the divider. Nothing, just old floor. Then I saw the grate. It was tucked behind the toilet, an old metal floor grate, maybe 6 inches wide, barely noticeable unless you knew to look. The dragging sound came again, closer this time, from beneath the grate, and then a voice, not loud, not whispered, just plain. "Do you see me yet?" I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember bolting down the hallway. All I know is I didn't stop running until I made it back to the classroom. Cammie was waiting by the door. "You didn't stay the full minute," she said, eyebrows raised. I just stared at her. "There's a grate," I said, "behind the toilet." Her smile dropped. She looked at me differently then. "You saw it?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the voice, not the words. Those were bad enough, but the tone, like it wasn't done yet, like it was waiting for me to come back. I hadn't told anyone else, not my parents, not my friends. But the next morning, someone slipped a folded paper into my locker. 3 words, scrawled in pencil. "Do not answer." I didn't expect anything to happen when I knocked on that stall door. I swear, it was just supposed to be a joke. One of those dares you do when you're bored and trying to impress the cooler kids. But something answered. Not with words. Not at first. It started with silence. A kind of wrong silence. You don't notice how many little noises a school bathroom makes until all of them stop at once. The buzzing of the overhead light, the dripping of a loose faucet, the echo of kids' sneakers outside the hallway, all of it just vanished, like someone pressed mute on the world. I remember the cold first. It spread from my hand, which was still resting on the chipped gray stall door after that third knock. It seeped into my wrist, my shoulder, my chest. Then the whisper started. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't in my ears, not exactly. It was inside my head, like a thought that didn't belong to me. Let's play. I turned to run, but the bathroom had changed. There were no stalls behind me anymore, just a blank wall. The window was gone. Even the mirror above the sinks vanished. All that was left was the third stall, and the old sink beside it, crusted with rust and dried soap. It smelled like rot. I blinked and shook my head, thinking it was some kind of hallucination. I'd barely slept the night before. Maybe I was dreaming, I told myself. But dreams don't touch you. The door creaked open. It moved slow, like something was pulling it from the inside. The shadows inside the stall were thick, like tar, and I couldn't see the back wall anymore, just black. Something stepped out. I didn't see her face, just her hair first, straight, dark, too long to be real. It trailed behind her like it was floating, like it had its own life. Then the edge of her dress, white and torn, dripping with something wet. She didn't walk. She slid, and then came the hand. It was small, kid-sized, but pale, and too thin, with fingers that were all the same length. It reached for my ankle, and I jumped back, slamming into the sink so hard I felt something in my lower back snap. I screamed. Then everything blinked back. The stalls were there again, the mirror, the sounds, the hum of the hallway. Someone was knocking on the bathroom door, calling my name. It was Derek, my classmate. He said I'd been gone too long and Miss Carver was looking for me. When I looked down, the floor beneath me was dry. No blood, no dark hair, no hand. But the pain in my back was real. The bruises on my ankle were real, and the rusted edge of the sink had a smear of blood where I'd hit it. Mine. I didn't say anything at first. I lied and said I slipped. Everyone laughed, but I noticed something on my desk when I got back to class. A folded piece of paper. I didn't see who left it. It read, "Next time, don't run." We haven't finished our game. The paper was damp, and it smelled like old water. I didn't believe in Hanako, not really. I mean, I'd heard the stories growing up, especially the one where if you knocked 3 times on the third stall and say, "Hanako-san, let's play," she'd pull you into the toilet and you'd vanish forever. I laughed about it with my friends. We told each other scarier versions at recess, daring each other to try it. But none of us ever actually did. Not until that day. It was the second week of school, and everything felt off. A new school, unfamiliar faces, an old building that creaked with every step. I'd transferred mid-year after my parents' divorce, and I was the new kid no one wanted to talk to. They were polite, but I could feel it. The quiet sideways glances, the whispers when I passed. Then there was the bathroom, the one near the back of the gym, down a short hallway with buzzing fluorescent lights and peeling paint. Everyone called it the cursed one. No one used it, not ever. They said something happened in there years ago. A girl or a boy, or maybe a teacher. The story changed every time someone told it, but one thing never changed. The fourth stall, not the third. That's what the stories always say. The third stall is where Hanako lives. But in this school, they said the fourth stall was different, dangerous. I didn't know what I was trying to prove. Maybe that I wasn't afraid. Maybe that if I tested the legend and nothing happened, someone would finally talk to me like I wasn't invisible. So I waited. After school, when everyone had gone home, and the janitor was somewhere on the first floor buffing the hallway floors, I slipped out of aftercare and walked to the gym bathroom. The hallway was colder than the rest of the school. It didn't make sense, but I felt it in my bones. The hum of the light above the door was low and broken, like a moan that didn't stop. The door creaked open, louder than I expected. I stepped in. 3 stalls on one side, 1 on the other. That was the first thing that struck me. Why 4? Every other bathroom in the school had 3, but this one had a 4th, alone on the right, like it had been added later or never meant to be there. I stood in front of it, the 4th stall. It looked no different than the others, except for the latch. The metal was rusted shut, but the door was slightly ajar, just enough to see the shadows inside. I thought about calling out a name, but not Hanako. The older kids had warned me, "Don't say her name in this school. She doesn't like that here." They didn't say what would happen if you did. So I knocked 3 times. Then I said, "Is someone there?" Silence. Then a shuffle. Not a sound, not a groan. A shuffle. Like something moving, like bare feet sliding against tile. I told myself it was the building. It's old. It creaks. I stepped back, and then the light flickered and stayed off. I couldn't see the stall anymore, just black. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, but something scratched behind me. Scratch, not loud, soft, slow, deliberate, like fingernails across metal. I turned back, and I swear, the stall door was open wider. I bolted. I didn't even try to be quiet. I ran out the bathroom, down the hallway, through the gym, and didn't stop until I was outside. I didn't tell anyone. But the next day, something changed. Someone else had gone into that bathroom after me. A boy named Aiden. He'd seen me sneak out after school the day before and thought I was doing something rebellious or cool, or maybe just weird enough to follow. He didn't come to school the next day or the day after. By Friday, the teachers stopped mentioning his name, but I saw something. That same morning, when I passed by the gym doors, there were wet footprints on the floor, bare feet, too small to be a teacher's, and they led from the gym bathroom into the hall. They stopped right in front of my locker. I hadn't been inside the old Roosevelt Elementary School for over a decade, not since they shut it down after the incident. But this time, I wasn't just breaking in for some dare. I needed answers. Ever since that day in 4th grade, when Ellie disappeared after saying, "Let's go ask for red paper in the bathroom," I haven't let myself forget. We all knew it wasn't a game anymore when the principal called an emergency assembly and the police searched every inch of the school. They never found her, and none of us admitted what we saw that day. We'd made a pact in the hallway, never talk about the 3rd stall on the 2nd floor. But here I was, breaking that promise. The school looked hollow, as if all the memories had drained out and left only the husk behind. Paint peeled from the walls in curled strips like decaying skin. My flashlight flickered as I pushed open the bathroom door. The The one where we all thought we'd seen a pale hand slide out from beneath the third stall years ago. I stepped in. It still smelled of iron and mildew. There was graffiti on the wall now, left by other kids who had broken in before me. Most of it was typical, names, dates, doodles, but one sentence stood out, scrawled in thick red marker directly on the third stall door. We asked. She answered, "I don't know what made me knock. Curiosity, guilt. Maybe I was tired of the dreams." Night after night, Ellie's hand reaching for mine, her voice echoing, "It's just a dare." So I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hanako, let's play," I whispered, heart pounding so loud it muffled everything else. Silence. Then something scraped across the floor from inside the stall. I stepped back. The bolt slowly slid open. My flashlight flickered violently. The door creaked open, inch by inch. Nothing. The stall was empty, just a crusted bowl and peeling tiles. Relief washed over me in a single hot wave of shame and relief. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. The flush behind me. The third stall's toilet flushed, even though no one was there. I turned back, and this time it wasn't empty. A girl stood in the stall wearing a red skirt and a white blouse. Her hair was perfectly still, black and sharp cut like a cartoon's, but her face, it was wrong, flat, paper white, and her mouth moved, soundless at first until my ears caught up. "Would you like red or blue?" I ran, but the bathroom was longer now. The walls stretched on, doors kept appearing, and every stall I passed slammed open behind me. Slam! 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 "Red or blue?" she asked again, louder this time, right behind me. I burst into the hallway, and it was filled with water. Somehow, impossibly, the entire corridor was knee-deep and rising. The emergency lights above flickered red, casting long shadows. A reflection shimmered on the surface. Not mine. Heron. She was walking on the water. I ran, slipping, screaming, tripping through it, and made it to the library. I slammed the doors behind me, stacked chairs against them like it would matter. I collapsed between bookshelves and tried to make sense of it all. That's when I noticed it. On the checkout counter, a book. Children's book, The School Spirits of Roosevelt Elementary. Inside the front cover was a list of names, Ellie's name, and below it, mine. The ink was still wet. I didn't expect to survive Thursday. After what happened to Trevor, everyone started pretending like nothing had happened. Nobody talked about his locker opening by itself, or the fact that his phone recorded 28 minutes of audio after his last Snapchat, just whispering in a low, wet breathing sound. Nobody wanted to say it, but everyone knew he wasn't coming back. The school still held classes like normal. I was sent to detention that day. Something about disruptive behavior and inciting hysteria. They didn't say it outright, but I knew I was being punished for not pretending. The detention room was in the older wing. That wing had been shut off for years, supposedly for renovations. It always smelled like old copper and mold. It was where the original locker room had been, the place where he came from. You know how they say some kids go missing and everyone just moves on? No assemblies, no vigils, just silence. That wing was silence. And now I was walking straight into it, alone. The halls got colder as I passed the taped-off stairwell. There was an emergency light buzzing faintly overhead, flickering like a pulse. I turned the corner and saw the classroom they told me to report to. Room 109. Door half open, like it had been waiting. I didn't want to walk in. but I knew if I didn't, they'd send someone to get me. And being dragged there by a teacher was somehow worse. The room was completely empty, not just the people. Everything was gone. No desks, no chairs, just bare concrete and scratch marks on the floor in looping spirals, and a single locker rusted and shaking in the corner. His locker, the one they never removed, the one they left behind. I turned to leave. Screw detention, screw school, screw all of this. But when I reached for the door handle, it wasn't there anymore. I touched smooth wall. I hit it, pounded it with both fists. That was when the locker groaned open behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. Slowly, the inside of the locker was deep, way deeper than it had any right to be, and inside wasn't darkness. It was water, black water, churning slowly like breath. A boy's voice echoed from it, muffled like it came from underwater. "Come back, you took my spot." I knew that voice. I'd heard it before, in the locker room showers, in the drains, on the radio static in Trevor's car the day before he vanished. The floor under me felt soft, wet. It was like I was standing on a soaked sponge. Water spread out from the locker, and it stank of rust and mold and something else, something wrong. I backed away, but the room tilted, or maybe I did. The walls bent toward me. The spiral scratches on the floor began to glow faintly, pulsing with that same rhythm I'd heard in the breathing sounds from Trevor's phone. And then I heard someone else. It was Ms. Danvers, the assistant principal, but not the real her. She sounded distant, like she was on a call with someone else. Yes, room 109, detention protocol, same as the others. Others? Then I understood. The school wasn't just hiding something, it was feeding it. The locker was still open. The water inside boiled quietly. And just before the lights in the ceiling all burst at once, I saw the reflection of him in the surface. A boy with no face, just bandages, arms covered in bruises, no shoes, school ID still clipped to his collar. The last kid who got sent to detention. I screamed, but no one heard, because detention never ends in this school. And now I'm part of the silence too. High school is nothing like the movies. There are no perfectly timed dance breaks in the middle of the hallways, no cafeteria food worth singing about, and certainly no golden friendships that sparkle through every exam season. What we get instead is chipped paint on walls, limp fries in plastic trays, and teachers whose eyes are so glazed over they might as well be sleepwalking. But even among the dullness, I tried to carve out something brighter for myself. I was 14, new to the stage, and even newer to the idea of being someone bold, someone seen. That's why I joined the Cultural Dance Club, a desperate attempt to snatch a sliver of the high school dream everyone talks about. Practices were grueling. They usually wrapped by sunset, leaving us drenched in sweat and tangled in laughter. But tonight wasn't just another practice. It was my debut. We had performed at a local stadium, our moves slicing through spotlights, and the cheers of a crowd that felt like 1,000 strong. It was the first time I truly felt alive as a student, not a number on a report card, not a body filling up a desk, but something more. Maybe dancing really was my thing. When we returned to the school compound, it was already 10:30 p.m. The campus, usually buzzing with life, had turned cold and unfamiliar. My legs were jelly from the performance, but my heart was still dancing. Our club room, our unofficial headquarters, was on the third floor of the canteen building. We trudged up the stairs, laughing breathlessly, dragging our tired feet up one more level to dump our stuff and change. The clubroom was narrow and cluttered, a cramped space with too many bodies and too little air. I sat on the floor, catching my breath, eyes half-lidded as everyone else started pulling off their outfits and wiping away glitter. I stared at the ceiling. A few seconds turned into a few minutes. Then I realized I didn't want to change here. Maybe it was shyness, maybe something deeper. But the thought of undressing in that hot, stuffy room made me feel exposed in the wrong way. I quietly got up and slipped out, closing the door gently behind me. The hallway was in absolute darkness. Not a single light flickered, and the only illumination came from the moon spilling in through scattered windows. The laughter and noise from the room behind me disappeared too quickly, like someone had turned off the volume. I paused, letting my eyes adjust, trying not to let my mind wander. But every instinct screamed this was a bad idea. Still, I pressed on. I just needed a quiet place to change, nothing more. Most of the classrooms were locked, their grilled doors shut tight, except one, Tiga Creative. The back door was ajar, a gaping mouth in a line of closed jaws. It didn't even register to me how strange that was. I was too tired to question it, and the hollow ache in my legs made every decision feel justified. So I walked toward it. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence, like I was walking with someone, though I was alone. I reached the doorway and caught a glimpse of myself in the window. My reflection was awful. Makeup smeared, costume rumpled, face pale under the soft moonlight. But that wasn't what made me freeze. Behind my reflection, another shape flickered. Something tall, too close. I blinked hard and looked again. Nothing, just me. Shaking my head, I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. The air was heavier here, like stepping underwater. The usual smell of dust and old textbooks was gone, replaced by something damp, rotting. The silence in the room wasn't like the hallway's silence. It was complete, smothering, as if the classroom existed in its own pocket of time, untouched by anything outside. I stood by the back exit, heart racing, telling myself it was fine. Just a classroom, just an open door, just my imagination. I set my bag on a nearby table and took out a fresh set of clothes, placing them neatly in front of me. Then I froze. A chill like ice sliding down my spine took hold of me. My breath caught. My eyes darted across the room and landed on the far corner, a table by the opposite wall. Someone was sitting there, a boy. He wore the same white uniform all of us wore, but it looked wrong on him. Too clean, too still. His figure was long and bony, his back impossibly straight, as if he were held up by wires. His hair was messy, falling over his face, and he stared at the bulletin board behind the classroom with eyes I couldn't see. He didn't blink. He didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then slowly, mechanically, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were bloodshot, not tired, but angry. Red veins webbed across the whites, his pupils thin and gleaming. And then came the sound, a creaking like stiff joints bending the wrong way. His head tilted, one crack at a time toward his shoulder, and a gurgling sound, low and wet, rose from his throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as he continued to twist and bend like his body was remembering how to be human and failing. And in that moment, I realized the night wasn't over. It had just begun. My body screamed for me to move, but I couldn't. It was as if the air had thickened, pressing down on my chest, pinning me to the spot. The boy, or whatever it was, didn't blink, didn't shift. He just kept twisting his head, slow and broken, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too hard. That wet, guttural sound from his throat grew louder, like something bubbling up from inside him, like a warning. I wanted to believe he was some prank. A mannequin, maybe. Maybe someone from the drama club messing with me. But no one could fake that presence. The raw, suffocating feeling of being watched, of being targeted. A single thought snapped through the fog in my head. Run. I grabbed my clothes from the table without folding them and spun around to bolt. My hand reached for the doorknob behind me, but it wouldn't turn. I jiggled it again, harder, still stuck. The door I had come through, the one I knew had been open, was now jammed shut. My breath quickened. I slammed my palm against the wood once, twice. No sound came back. Not from the hallway, not from the dance club room. It was like the whole world had gone mute. Behind me, I heard the squeal of a chair dragging against the floor. I froze, my fingers still on the doorknob. That awful creaking had returned, now joined by heavy, deliberate footsteps. One step, then another, each one louder than the last, dragging and thudding like bones slapping concrete. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every nerve screamed at me not to look. But something in me, that cursed curiosity, twisted my head halfway. He was walking toward me now, slow and stiff, his arms hanging limp at his sides. His neck was still cocked, unnaturally, his eyes burning with that same unblinking rage. And worse, his mouth was starting to open. But there was no breath, no voice, only that same gurgle growing louder, sharper, like it was crawling out of his throat. Panicking, I stumbled sideways toward the windows, hoping one might be loose. My shoulder slammed against the nearest pane, but it held firm. The windows were grilled, too, like most classrooms, steel bars crossing them like a prison cell. I rattled them anyway, trying to find some weakness, anything I could slip through. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Silence again. I turned. He was gone. The boy had vanished. My heart lurched into my throat. There was nowhere for him to hide, no desks overturned, no closet doors. It was just an empty classroom, wasn't it? I took a step back, clutching my bundled clothes like a shield, and scanned the room. Every shadow seemed deeper now, more alive. My eyes flicked to the back corner. Nothing. Then to the teacher's desk. Still empty. I dared to breathe. A cold rush of air brushed against my ear. I spun around. There he was, right behind me. His face was inches from mine, his mouth now stretched wide, far too wide, lips cracked and dry, revealing a gaping void where a throat should be. No teeth, just darkness. And that noise, that awful choking noise, it spilled out of him, vibrating in my skull. I screamed, louder than I ever had, but the sound didn't feel real. It felt swallowed, like the room absorbed it before it could even leave my throat. I stumbled backward, crashing into a desk. He didn't follow. He just stood there, that mouth still open, that sound still crawling out of him. That's when I noticed something behind him. The front door of the classroom, the one the teachers use, it was slightly open. Hope flared inside me. I bolted toward it, darting around the creature with every ounce of energy left in my trembling legs. His arm shot out, but he was slow, stuttering in movement like a broken machine. His fingertips grazed my shoulder as I passed, ice cold and brittle. But I made it. I yanked the door open and spilled into the hallway, panting, heart thundering. The hallway wasn't just dark anymore. It was wrong. It stretched endlessly now, far longer than it had been when I came in. The shadows were thicker, almost solid. I turned to slam the door behind me, but there was nothing there. No door, no classroom, just a blank wall. I reached out, confused, shaking, but it was smooth concrete. 3 creative had vanished, and then the lights above me started flickering, one by one, buzzing, dimming. In that brief flicker of light, I saw it again. His silhouette standing at the far end of the corridor, motionless, watching. I was no longer in my school. Wherever I was now, it looked the same, but it wasn't, and I wasn't alone. I ran. I didn't look back. My legs, once heavy with exhaustion from the performance, now carried me with an urgency I didn't know I had. The hallway stretched on endlessly, each shadow reaching out like claws trying to catch me. The air was different now, thick, damp, like I was running through water. Every breath burned my lungs. The world had become muffled, as though I was underwater, with only the sound of my footsteps slamming against the cold tile keeping me tethered to reality. I don't remember how far I ran. I don't remember turning any corners, but somehow, eventually, I reached the stairwell. It wasn't supposed to look like that. The lights above the stairwell were dim, flickering with an eerie orange glow that buzzed like dying insects. The stairs themselves were chipped and cracked, but it wasn't the decay that made my stomach churn. It was that they went both ways forever, up and down endlessly. No ground floor, no rooftop, just stairs. As if the building had been torn from reality and left floating in some distorted space. My mind screamed at me to go down. That was the only direction that made sense. Down meant the exit. Down meant escape. I gripped the rusted railing and descended quickly, skipping 2 steps at a time. My hand burned where I touched the metal. It was freezing cold, like touching dry ice. But I didn't let go. The cold was real, tangible, proof that I was still awake, still alive. Behind me, I heard it again. That sound. A dragging footstep, too slow to be human. And the creaking. That horrible bone-splitting creak. Then came the gurgling, louder this time, wet and labored, like something trying to breathe without lungs. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't need to. I knew he was there. The boy. Or the thing that used to be a boy. I pushed my legs faster, down and down. But the stairwell never ended. Floor signs blurred past. 3rd, 2nd, 1st, B1, B2, and then it kept going. How deep did this place go? Suddenly, the lights above flickered once more, and then died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. I stopped. My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might give me away. I pressed my back against the wall, straining my ears. The silence was overwhelming. No dragging, no creaking, no breath. Just as I allowed myself to hope that maybe it was over, that maybe I had somehow outrun him, I felt it, not heard, not saw, felt, a breath, not mine, cold and shallow, just inches from my face. I clamped a hand over my mouth, barely holding back a scream, and then something brushed against my arm, something dry, brittle fingers skimming along my skin like paper scraping flesh. I snapped. I let out a short cry and launched myself down the stairs blindly. My foot slipped and I tumbled forward, crashing into the steps. My clothes flew from my arms and scattered into the darkness, but I didn't stop. I crawled. scrambled back to my feet, and kept running, blood now dripping down my elbow and knee. The stairwell finally opened into a corridor. Not the school, not anymore. The walls here were old, the paint peeling in long strips like shedding skin. Water dripped from cracks above. The floor was slick and uneven. There were no classrooms, no windows, just a single hallway lit by a pale greenish glow coming from flickering overhead lamps. But I couldn't stop to think about where I was. I had to keep moving. Every part of me screamed for safety, some kind of shelter, some kind of boundary between me and him. At the end of the hallway was a door, old, wooden, the kind with a sliding peephole. It looked out of place in a school, almost like it belonged to another time. But it was open. I hesitated for only a second before stepping through it, and just like that, everything changed again. I found myself inside what looked like an old storage room. Dust coated every surface. Torn posters clung to the walls, some too faded to read. A dozen broken chairs were piled in a corner like a barricade. It was freezing, and yet I was drenched in sweat. The door slammed shut behind me on its own. I didn't have the energy to panic. My breathing was ragged. My body ached. I sank to the floor, pressing my back against the cold concrete wall. For a moment, just a single, fleeting moment, the silence felt safe. But then I saw them. Scratches. Not just on the door, but on the walls. Long, desperate scratches. Deep ones, as though someone had been trying to claw their way out. And then I noticed the message, etched into the wall beside me, carved in jagged letters as though by fingernails, were the words, "You're in his place now." That's when the lights in the storage room began to flicker, slowly, rhythmically, like something was breathing with them. In, outside, in, outside. And then, from somewhere behind the stacked chairs, came the sound. Drag, creak, gurgle. He had followed me here. He was never going to stop. And this time, I didn't know if I'd get the chance to run again. I pressed myself against the farthest corner of the storage room, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The flickering lights above cast warped shadows across the chairs and broken furniture, each twitch of light making me flinch. That sound, the drag, the creak, the wet gurgle, echoed from behind the stacked chairs. He was still there, watching, waiting. I had to move. Staying put would only give him the advantage. Every instinct inside me screamed to be anywhere but here. I scanned the room, eyes darting, searching for any possible exit. One of the walls had a ventilation shaft, small, rusted, but maybe just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I crawled toward it, trying not to make a sound, muffling my own breathing with the sleeve of my costume. The sharp edges of the floor cut into my knees as I moved, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The gurgling grew louder, sloppy, guttural, as though the boy behind the chairs had started to speak, yet no words came out. Just pain, just fury. I reached the vent and yanked at the rusty grate. It groaned loudly, the metal shrieking like a wounded animal. I froze. Silence. Then, bang! The chairs behind me exploded outward, scattering across the floor like they'd been tossed by a storm. I didn't look back. I shoved myself into the vent, scraping my arms against jagged metal as I crawled deeper inside. Dust filled my lungs. It was tight, claustrophobic. But I kept moving. He was crawling after me. I could hear him dragging himself through the debris behind me. Too big for the vent, yet somehow still coming. The metal bent and groaned around me. Every movement forward felt like a lifetime. My costume tore, my skin burned from the cuts, but I didn't stop. The vent turned sharply and dropped downward, a steep incline that I couldn't resist. I slipped, tumbling through the shaft before crashing through a loose panel at the end. I landed hard on a concrete floor, dazed, ears ringing. It was pitch dark again, but this darkness was different, thicker, almost alive. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I had landed in another classroom, except it wasn't a normal classroom anymore. It was older, much older than anything in the school. Wooden desks sat rotting in crooked lines. The blackboard had words scratched onto it but not written, gouged in with something sharp. I approached it slowly, brushing off dust to reveal what was carved. He never left. I backed away from the board, trembling. This place, it was part of the school, but buried deep, hidden. A forgotten wing, maybe, or something that should have been forgotten. Something that was never meant to be found. I turned to find the door, but there wasn't one. Just 4 crumbling walls and a single window sealed with iron bars. And then the whispers began. Faint at first, like voices caught in wind, but they were everywhere. Inside the walls, under the floor, above me. He sees you. Don't look back. You let him out. My hands clamped over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head now, echoing, clawing at the edges of my sanity. I dropped to the ground, curling into myself, trying to make them stop. And then the boy stepped through the wall. No doors, no windows, just phased in as though the room was built around him. He stood there, his limbs twitching like a puppet on tangled strings, head still tilted far too much to the left. His bloodshot eyes glowed faintly in the dark. His mouth opened slowly, and this time he did speak, his voice low, hoarse, dragging like metal scraping on gravel. "You're one of us now," I screamed. He lunged. I ran, not toward him, but at the wall behind me. I didn't care if it was solid or if it broke every bone in my body. I had to escape. I braced myself and rammed into the wall, and to my shock, it gave way like paper. I crashed through into another hallway. This one looked almost normal. Almost. The walls here were clean, the tiles shiny, the lights steady, but no signs, no windows, no sounds, like a replica of the school made from memory, but with all the life sucked out of it. I turned in circles, no voices now, no footsteps, no whispers. Even the gurgle had faded. For the first time in what felt like hours, I was alone. I slumped against the wall, shaking. My mind raced. What was this place? Why me? Why now? Then I heard something. A phone ringing, faint, from down the hall. I stood up slowly, legs unsteady, and followed the sound. The phone was inside a small office-like room. I stepped in cautiously. The ringing stopped as I picked up the receiver. Static filled the line for a few seconds. Then a voice, my voice, whispering, "Don't go to the last floor." Click. The phone went dead, and behind me, the door slowly creaked shut. I didn't wait for him to move. The moment his body twitched forward, I bolted out of the sealed room. I didn't know where I was running or even what direction I'd come from. I just knew I had to put distance between me and that view. Every step echoed like a scream in the endless. But I didn't stop to look back. The phone's warning rang in my head over and over. Don't go to the last floor. But where else could I go? The hallways twisted and branched, like the school had been rearranged by something that didn't understand how buildings worked. I turned left, then right, then up a stairwell. My lungs burned and my muscles screamed for rest. My legs moved on instinct until I reached a rusted elevator at the far end of a hall. Its metal doors were halfway open, revealing a shaft lit by a faint red glow coming from deep below. I shouldn't have gone near it, but something, curiosity, desperation, or maybe just the whisper of my own voice in my mind, pulled me closer. Inside, a dusty panel blinked. The buttons had no numbers, just floors marked by strange etchings, scratches rather than labels. One button was glowing faintly, almost pulsing. The bottommost one, I didn't press it, but the elevator descended anyway. The doors sealed shut with a loud clang, and the box groaned as it slid downward. The lights above me flickered erratically. The walls creaked as though the building was breathing around me. I backed into the corner, watching the display panel glitch between symbols that made no sense, until everything went black. Then the doors opened. The air was thick, almost unbreathable, and carried a smell of old wood, damp soil, and something rotting underneath it all. I stepped out slowly, feeling like I was being watched from every shadow. This floor wasn't part of the school. No desks, no boards, no walls even. Just a vast open space with decaying tiles that stretched out into the dark. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was a mirror. It was tall and freestanding, its glass clean and perfect in the dim glow of a single flickering light bulb above it. I approached carefully, unsure why I was drawn to it, but something told me this mirror mattered. When I looked in, I didn't see myself. I saw the dance club, my teammates, all standing silently in their costumes, faces pale, eyes wide, but unmoving. They weren't talking. They weren't breathing. Behind them was the same boy, the tall, unnatural one. His face twisted into a jagged grin that spread too far across his cheeks. He lifted a hand and pointed, not at them, but at me. The reflection of the room changed. Now it showed the third floor, the hallway outside 3 Creative. The door was open, and I was standing there, watching myself walk inside, watching everything begin again, a loop. My fingers trembled as I touched the mirror. Cold bit into my skin. But then something grabbed my wrist from the other side. I screamed and yanked my arm back, falling to the ground. The mirror rippled like water, and the boy began stepping out of it, his eyes locked on mine, mouth stretching into that horrible grin as if he'd waited an eternity for this moment. I crawled backward blindly, my hand hitting something hard and metallic. It was a broken stage light from the performance hall, toppled over, wires exposed. Without thinking, I yanked the wires out and jammed them into the mirror frame just as the boy was halfway through. There was a flash of light, then a shriek, inhuman and endless, filled the space around me as the mirror cracked, then shattered into dust. The sound stopped. The air grew still, and I was alone. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the cold classroom floor of 3 Creative. The moonlight poured in from the window, everything in its place, the desks, the boards, the silence. My costume was still half on, the clothes I had placed earlier untouched on the table. The door creaked open. My clubmates stood there laughing, chatting. "Hey, we were looking for you," one of them said. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, my voice trapped somewhere inside my chest. I followed them out, the hallway now buzzing with post-performance energy, normal again. But just before I turned the corner, I glanced back at the classroom. He was standing there in the window's reflection, grinning, still watching. I couldn't scream. The sound choked in my throat, stuck somewhere between terror and disbelief. My legs finally responded, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the side of a desk with a loud thud. The boy's head continued twisting to an impossible angle, his gurgling deepening into a growl that didn't sound human. I bolted through the open door and into the pitch-dark hallway, heart hammering so hard it echoed louder than my footsteps. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel him behind me, that cold breath brushing against the back of my neck, his presence stretching like smoke, impossible to outrun. I turned a corner and slammed into a wall. No, not a wall, a mirror. It was standing right there in the middle of the corridor, leaning unnaturally with no frame, no stand, just glass hanging in mid-air like it had grown from the shadows. And in the reflection, I saw not myself, but him, standing inches away. Smiling. Without thinking, I ducked under the mirror, running into the adjacent hallway, trying desperately to reach the stairwell. My mind was spinning. The building was wrong. It felt twisted. Corridors stretched longer than they should. Corners looped into themselves. My school had turned into a maze built by nightmares. And then, finally, I saw the faint yellow glow of the stairway emergency light. I rushed toward it, feet slipping on the old floor tiles. But just as I reached the stairs, a freezing hand clamped around my ankle. I screamed. I kicked violently, turning to see his arm stretching out of the floor itself like it was water, that ghostly face rising after it, eyes locked with mine. His mouth opened and whispered something, not words, sounds, like broken syllables played backward. I didn't understand it, but something in my head did, and it hurt. Desperate, I grabbed the handrail and pulled with every ounce of strength I had left. My leg freed. I scrambled upward, floor by floor, never stopping, never breathing right. I reached the dance club room. My teammates had long gone. The door was half shut. I threw myself inside and slammed it behind me. But there he was, already inside, standing by the mirror on the far wall. I was too late. Only this time, he didn't move. He just stared into the mirror, into me. His body started twitching like he was being pulled in multiple directions, like something was resisting him now. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe I'd seen too many horror movies, or maybe it was instinct. But I grabbed the full-length mirror from the corner of the room, the one we used for practice, and angled it toward him. His gaze snapped toward the reflection, and then it began. The classroom shook. The mirror started vibrating violently. His body was slowly being pulled toward it, like gravity had shifted. He screeched, high and piercing, thrashing, struggling, but the glass kept pulling. Cracks ran across its surface, but it held. With a final lurch, he was sucked in. The mirror went black, then shattered. Silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, my ears ringing, my chest heaving. Shards of mirror glittered on the floor, unmoving. The cold that had clung to the building lifted, slowly, gently. When the morning light seeped into the room through the windows, it was as if nothing had ever happened. I changed quietly and left. No one asked where I had been. No one mentioned the boy. It was like the night had never existed outside my own memory. But things were different now. The mirror in the practice room was gone the next day. Teachers said it had been moved for safety reasons. The 3 creative classroom was permanently sealed. And me? I started sitting at the back of every room, always near the exit. I don't stay late anymore. I never go near mirrors at night. And I never ignore that instinct again. Because sometimes the worst isn't what happens in the dark. It's what follows you out of it. It was a quiet autumn evening when John and I sat down to dinner, the kind of night that invites old memories. The air was calm, the lamps burned low, and conversation naturally turned to the past. Those early school days that somehow still hung in the corners of our minds. It was then that John, leaning slightly forward, his voice soft but steady, began a tale unlike any I'd heard before. I started school in September 1870, he said, a gray stone building up north, not far from the border. I was 11, a lonely boy, but I quickly became friends with a Scottish lad named MacLeod. He had a strange way of looking at the world, always thoughtful, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. We were placed in the same dormitory, the same classes. He became my closest companion in those years. John spoke slowly, eyes narrowing as he recalled the details. It was a large school, and the staff seemed to change with the seasons. Then came Mr. Sampson, a tall man, pale-skinned, with a black beard and long hands that always seemed to be dusted with chalk. He was our new Latin teacher. We boys liked him. He wasn't harsh, and he had stories. Tales of deserts, lost cities, strange customs in foreign lands. And always he had with him a coin, an old gold piece, Turkish he said, with a king's face on one side and oddly his own initials, GWOS, and the date 24th July, 1865 on the other. The detail caught me off guard. His initials were on the coin? Yes, John nodded. He told us he had it made as a keepsake from a strange experience abroad, though he never gave the full story. It wasn't long before Sampson's teaching style stood out. He didn't follow the usual dry method. Instead of drilling grammar rules, he asked us to create our own Latin sentences. It was more alive, more mysterious. One day, he gave us the word remember, memento, and told us to build a sentence around it. Everyone worked quietly. I finished mine early, but MacLeod seemed stuck. He sat there chewing his pencil, eyes fixed on nothing. Then, just before Sampson reached his desk, MacLeod scribbled something quickly. Sampson stopped, read it, and his face changed. He didn't shout. He just went very still, like something behind his eyes had frozen. After a moment, he started asking MacLeod questions. Where he was from, if he had family nearby, how long he had lived in his town. What was the sentence? I asked John. He drew a breath. Memento pute hinterquator taxos. MacLeod told me it came to him all at once, like a picture in his head. He said it might mean, remember the well among the 4 yew trees. He didn't know why he'd written it, neither did I. The next day, MacLeod caught a cold and was kept in bed for nearly a week. During that time, everything at school seemed ordinary. But a month later, we had another Latin writing session. This time, we wrote our sentences on separate slips of paper and handed them in. Sampson read through them at his desk. I remember the moment he reached one particular paper, his face drained of color. He stood up, clutching the sheet, and walked out of the room without a word. We waited, puzzled, then curious. Finally, I went to the front and looked at the papers. There were 17 in total, yet there were only 16 boys in our class. John paused, his voice suddenly lower. The strange thing, he continued, was that the top paper was written in red ink. something strictly forbidden at our school. It read, "Si tu non veneris ad me, ego veniam a te." If you don't come to me, I will come to you. None of us had written it. We swore to it. I took the paper and kept it in my pocket. But when I looked at it again that afternoon, it was blank. Just white paper, with my own fingerprint still faintly marked on it. The writing had vanished. He looked up, his face expressionless. Samson came back at the end of the lesson, said nothing, just dismissed us and looked at each paper slowly. He probably thought his mind was playing tricks, but he looked shaken. A silence settled over the room as John's voice trailed off. That had been the first sign. Something stirring, barely visible, but undeniably there. A teacher with a coin from the past. A boy who dreamed in Latin. A sentence that came from nowhere, and something, or someone, waiting to be remembered. And that was only the beginning. It had been nearly a month since McLeod's strange Latin phrase had unsettled Mr. Sampson. The school had returned to its usual rhythm, lessons, bells, and the ever-present gray sky outside our tall windows. Sampson continued teaching as before, though I noticed he had grown quieter. He didn't tell us stories of his travels as much anymore, and he had a way of glancing over his shoulder now, as if expecting someone to appear behind him. We thought little of it at the time. Adults were peculiar, we believed, and left it at that. Then came the day of the second incident. Sampson entered the classroom looking pale, as if he hadn't slept. He barely spoke, just gave out a simple task. Write a Latin sentence on a slip of paper, as we had done before. We all bent over our desks, scratching with our pens. It was routine, ordinary, until it wasn't. I remember the stillness in the room when Sampson picked up the top slip from the stack. His eyes locked on it. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no sound came out. Then his face turned completely white, like chalk, and the paper trembled in his hand. He stood suddenly, chair scraping loudly behind him. The paper fluttered to the floor, and without a word, Sampson turned and walked quickly out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. We waited, unsure of what to do. A teacher had never left like that before. The silence stretched. Finally, curiosity pushed me to my feet. I walked to the front of the class and looked at the papers. That's when I saw it. The top slip was written in red ink. Our school had a firm rule. No student was ever allowed to use red ink. Only teachers used it, and even then rarely. I picked up the paper. The sentence was short, precise, and chilling. Si tu non veneris ad me, ego veniam ad te. If you don't come to me, I will come to you. I turned to the others. Who wrote this? I asked. One by one, they shook their heads. I knew them well. They looked just as disturbed as I felt. We counted the slips again. 17. But there were only 16 boys in our class. The extra paper had no owner. I slid the strange slip into my pocket. Later that afternoon, when the confusion had faded and lessons resumed with another teacher, I remembered the note and pulled it out to examine it again. My breath caught. The paper was blank. Not a single trace of the red ink remained. Only the slight grease down its center and the smudges from my fingers reminded me it had ever held any writing. I stared at it, heart beating fast. I was sure it was the same paper, and yet it was as if the sentence had never existed. When Sampson returned later that day, he looked exhausted. His skin was drawn tight, and his eyes didn't meet ours. He dismissed the class without much thought, glancing at each paper as though searching for something that might not be there anymore. That night passed uneventfully, or so we thought. The real disturbance came the night after. It was near midnight when McLeod shook me awake. I opened my eyes to find his face just inches from mine, pale and filled with fear. He didn't speak at first, only pulled me toward the window. "Quick," he whispered, "someone's outside Samson's room." We leaned into the dark, faces close to the cold glass. The yard was mostly hidden in shadows, trees barely swaying in the breeze. At first, I saw nothing, but McLeod kept staring, his voice low and shaky. I didn't hear anything. I just woke up and was standing here. There was a man, tall, thin, horribly thin. His skin was gray. He didn't look alive, John. He was standing just below Samson's window, staring up at it, making a motion with his hand as if calling him. I scanned the yard again. It was empty now. Nothing moved. No sound broke the silence, not even the rustling of leaves. Still, there was a strange heaviness in the air, as if the night was holding its breath. We waited a long time. Nothing else appeared. No figure, no sound. Just the chill, the dark, and the sense that something invisible had brushed close to us and was now gone. The next morning, Samson was missing. No one had seen him. His room was empty, bed untouched. He hadn't signed the attendance register, and his belongings, his books, his coat, even the gold coin he always carried, were gone. The teachers assumed he had left during the night. No one could explain why, but McLeod and I knew better. We said nothing. We never told anyone but the red ink, or the extra paper, or the figure outside the window. Samson never returned. His name was never mentioned again. But the image of that sentence written in defiant red would stay with me forever. "If you don't come to me, I will come to you." After Mr. Sampson vanished, life at the school shifted in an unsettling way. The teachers never spoke of his absence. No announcements, no explanations. His name was quietly removed from the notice board, his belongings gone from the staff room as if he had never existed. A new Latin teacher took over his classes, but the tone was different. More disciplined, fewer stories, and no mention of personal artifacts or ancient coins. McLeod and I spoke very little about what we had seen, or more accurately, what he had seen that night by the window. But a silence hung between us, a silent understanding that something had come to claim Samson, and that it hadn't come from this world. It was weeks before McLeod mentioned the vision again. We were walking along the edge of the school garden during our Sunday break. The weather was colder now, and bare trees cast thin shadows over the grass. "Do you remember the phrase I wrote?" he said, stopping by a row of box hedges. "Memento pute inter quatuor taxos." I nodded. How could I forget? "Remember the well among the 4 yew trees?" McLeod looked out across the distant trees beyond the field wall. "Do you think it was real? The place I saw in my mind when I wrote those words? I've never been there, but it was so vivid. There was a stone well in the middle, and 4 trees, not oaks or maples, tall yews, all perfectly spaced around it." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked toward the far edge of the school grounds, where the thickest part of the forest crept toward the back wall. That evening, unable to shake the thought, I took my notebook and drew what McLeod described. A circular well ringed by 4 symmetrical trees. Something about it felt unfinished, like a memory that wasn't mine, but had been given to me. A few days later, something even stranger happened. A letter arrived for me, though I hadn't written to anyone. The envelope had no return address and bore a strange old stamp with faded ink. Inside was a single folded piece of parchment. I unfolded it slowly. It was blank, or so I thought, until I tilted it toward the light by the window. Faint letters began to appear as though written in smoke. I could barely make them out. Do not forget the place he would not go. I stared at those words for a long time. They faded just as quickly as they had appeared. By morning, the paper was blank again. From then on, I began to have dreams. Always the same scene, the well under moonlight, trees swaying as if breathing. A figure stood near the edge, tall, still its face, never fully visible, and always I felt that I was being watched not by the figure, but by something deeper, something far beneath the stones. When I told McLeod about my dreams, his face paled. "I've seen it too," he whispered, "but not in dreams. I see it when I close my eyes. For just a moment, the same well, and always the same presence, watching from below." We were both afraid to talk further, but curiosity has a way of growing stronger than fear. A week later, McLeod came to me after dinner. He held a crumpled piece of paper. "I found this inside one of Sampson's old books," he said, "hidden between the pages." It was aged and brittle, but the writing on it was clear, in the same red ink from that day. It waits still. It remembers. We knew then that this wasn't just a matter of a missing teacher or a haunted dream. Something was left unfinished. Something tied to that well, to the phrase McLeod had written without understanding, to the coin, to the number 17 when only 16 boys were in the room. And so we made a decision, silent but certain. We had to find the well, if it existed at all. Somewhere beyond the boundary of the school grounds, hidden among trees no one walked past, there would be a place where memory held a grip stronger than time. And maybe, just maybe, the truth about Sampson still lingered there, waiting. The memory of that old coin haunted Edgar long after he left the countryside. He could not shake the image of it, the strange inscription, the quiet certainty in John's voice that night at dinner, and the eerie coincidence of the coin reappearing exactly where the mysterious Latin phrase had once pointed, among 4 trees near a forgotten well. Weeks passed. Edgar returned to the city, resumed his daily life, but the strange story refused to let go. His thoughts would drift often at night to the well, the bodies, and the man who vanished, Sampson. The idea that it had all been a coincidence no longer seemed plausible. So he wrote to John. The reply came quickly, though brief. "I've dreamt of the place too. I see the well sometimes just before I wake. There's something more, something still waiting to be found. McLeod has written to me as well. He's seen it again." That was enough for Edgar. He packed a small case and made his way back to Ireland, determined to return to the well himself. His friend, the owner of the estate, welcomed him with surprise, but no questions. Edgar made his intentions clear. He wanted to revisit the garden. The friend agreed, though with an odd look in his eyes. "Just be careful around that corner," he said quietly. "Some things don't like to be uncovered." The well was still there, of course. The trees, 4 tall yews, stood in perfect symmetry around it, casting long shadows over the stone ring. Nature had begun to reclaim it. Moss, ivy, and a silence that pressed in like fog. Edgar stood at the edge and stared down. The stones disappeared into blackness. The earth around the well had already been disturbed once when the bodies were removed. But now Edgar wanted to go deeper, not with tools, but with presence, with awareness. He sat near the edge and waited. As night came on, the garden grew cold. A soft wind stirred the trees, and then he saw it. The figure just on the edge of the clearing between two of the yew trunks, tall, gaunt, not moving, just watching. Edgar's breath caught. He didn't run. He didn't cry out. Instead, he stood slowly, every muscle tense. The figure seemed to shimmer, not quite real, and yet more solid than shadow. Its face was hidden, or perhaps faceless. But Edgar could feel the stare, cold and fixed. He took a step forward. The figure raised one long arm and pointed, not at Edgar, but at the well. Then it was gone. The wind fell still. The silence was total. Edgar, trembling, looked down at the well again. A voice, clear as if spoken aloud in his ear, echoed inside his skull. "If you don't come to me, I will come to you." That same sentence, the one in red ink, the one that had made Samson flee the classroom in terror. Edgar left the garden and returned to the house, shaken but resolved. He wrote to John and McLeod. They needed to return, together, the three of them, and a week later, they did. They met again at the old estate, older now, but all changed by the strange thread that bound them. McLeod arrived last, his face drawn, his eyes troubled. "It never left me," he confessed as they walked out toward the well. "Even after all these years, something called to me every night. I know it sounds mad, but I don't think it ever wanted Samson. Not really. I think it wants someone who remembers, someone who knows." They gathered around the well in the cold dusk. The clearing was hushed. Nothing stirred. Without speaking, they each placed a hand on the ancient stone rim. The ground beneath them felt unnaturally still. Then a deep sound, like something heavy shifting far below, rose through the earth. The well vibrated faintly under their palms. McLeod gasped. "I see it again," he whispered. "I see it clearer than ever. There was never just one person in that well. There were always two. One of them dragged the other down." Edgar turned sharply to him. "Dragged?" McLeod nodded slowly. "The second one never went willingly." John stepped back. "Then who was the second?" They looked at each other, and no one spoke the name aloud. But all three knew what they feared. The wind picked up again. A distant rustling, or perhaps a voice. It was hard to tell. But in the darkness under the trees, movement began again. Not from one direction, but all around them. Whatever had waited here had never truly left, and it was no longer content to stay hidden beneath the stones. It was not long after the discovery of the coin and the two bodies that Edgar began to feel uneasy, as though something had been disturbed, not just in the earth beneath those trees, but in time itself. The story John had told, the message in Latin, the vanishing of Samson, and now the bodies. These were not separate events. They were pieces of a whole, and Edgar could no longer pretend that coincidence had anything to do with it. One evening, driven by a sense of unfinished business, Edgar returned alone to the garden. The trees were still, but they no longer felt like just trees. The wind didn't stir them, yet their shadows moved subtly, unnaturally, as if watching him. The well stood as it had before, silent, ancient, and waiting. He stood before it, the memory of McLeod's sentence echoing in his head. Memento pute interquatur taxos. Remember the well among the 4 trees. He did remember, and more than that, he now understood. The second body, wrapped tightly in the arms of the first. The records later showed that Samson had never been officially hired by the school. No employment files, no letters of reference, no pay, nothing. As if he had arrived from nowhere, taught for a brief time, and then vanished. And yet, he had left an impression on students, on memory, and now, it seemed, on the very land itself. Edgar returned to London and met with John once more. MacLeod joined them a day later. The 3 of them sat in silence for a while, each weighed down by the same invisible burden. Finally, Edgar opened his case and placed the coin on the table. "It's not just a souvenir," he said. "It's a marker. A key." John nodded slowly. "And a message." "I believe Samson never intended to teach," Edgar continued. "He came back. He returned for something or someone. And that night, he was taken by whatever he once escaped." "But why MacLeod?" John asked quietly. MacLeod looked down, his hands clasped together. "Because I remembered." Edgar glanced at him sharply. "You mean the sentence?" "No," MacLeod said softly. "I mean before that. I remembered the place, not from stories or dreams, but truly remembered. I've seen those trees before, when I was very small. I think I was born near there. My mother never spoke of it, but I remember being near that well. I remember voices. And I think Samson knew me, not as a student, but from before." John paled. "You're saying he didn't just come for a job? He came for someone who had been there, someone who belonged to that place, someone who still remembered." A heavy silence fell. Outside, the sky darkened, though the hour was early. Clouds gathered unnaturally fast. MacLeod rose from his chair and walked to the window, staring out. "I think we disturbed more than bones." Edgar stood as well. "Then we have to go back. One last time, we finish it, or it won't stop." They returned together. The well was waiting for them. By day it looked much the same, but as evening settled, the shadows lengthened in impossible directions. The trees loomed like watchers from some older world, bending slightly, though there was no wind. The coin was returned to its place, dropped gently into the well by Edgar's hand. And then MacLeod stepped forward. "I remember now," he whispered. "I said those words before, long ago. I said them when someone else was taken, and now it has waited for me." John stepped forward to stop him, but Edgar held out an arm. "Let him finish," he said softly. MacLeod turned to face them. "Whatever was buried here, whatever called, it needs one who remembers. It doesn't take strangers. It takes what was once its own." With that, MacLeod placed both hands on the edge of the well, whispered something neither of them caught, and leaned forward, not to fall, but to listen. And in that moment, the air grew silent, as if the world paused. Then came the sound, not a voice, not words, but something ancient and deep, like the earth speaking in a forgotten language. MacLeod stepped back. "I understand now," he said. "It never wanted to harm us. It only wanted to be remembered." The ground trembled slightly beneath them. A wind rushed upward from the well, a breath from something old and sealed. Then, silence. The next morning, the well was gone. Where it once stood, there was only grass. The yew trees remained, but the space between them felt lighter, emptied. The coin was never seen again. Years passed. The garden grew wild, the estate was sold, and time moved on. But sometimes, when Edgar closed his eyes, he saw 4 trees standing like sentinels, and in their center, not darkness, but memory, and he always remembered. I noticed it first on a Tuesday morning halfway through homeroom, when I reached the usual stretch of lockers near the science wing. The gap hit me like a cold breath. Locker 309 was gone. Not broken, not marked for maintenance, just gone. The lockers were always lined up in perfect sequence, a comforting row of dented gray doors and faded stickers. But today, where 309 should have been, there was only smooth wall. The numbers jumped from 308 straight to 310. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for something to click. Maybe I was standing in the wrong hall. Maybe I was losing it. But I wasn't. This was the same spot I visited every morning last semester, punching in the same combination, grabbing my chem textbook and earbuds. I asked Jamie about it at lunch. Locker 309. She frowned, digging through her chips. There is no 309 in that hall. Hasn't been one since I've been here. I asked a few others, friends, classmates, even Mr. Dreyfus, who'd been teaching for over 20 years. Everyone gave the same response. Confusion, a laugh, or that pitying look adults give when they think a student is too stressed. But I remembered the smell of the rusted hinge, the way the door stuck slightly at the top. I even remembered taping a photo inside, a grainy Polaroid of my dog in a raincoat. Gone, like the locker never existed. That night, unable to let it go, I logged into the school's ancient student record system. Most students didn't even know it existed, but I'd used it once during a research project. I searched for locker 309. One result popped up. Ava Merrill, assigned. Locker 309, graduation year, blank. No exit date, no transfer, no graduation photo, no other records under her name. I checked the class rosters, guidance office, attendance logs. Nothing. The next morning, I returned to the hallway before school started. It was quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I stood in front of the blank wall, placing my hand where the locker should have been, cold. Just as I was about to turn away, a sound came from inside the wall, a faint, metallic clang, like someone brushing against the inside of a locker door. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared, heart thudding in my chest. There was no locker there, but something was definitely inside. I wasn't even supposed to be there. Detention was for kids who mouthed off, skipped class, or vandalized bathroom stalls. I did none of that. All I did was ask too many questions. About Ava Merrill, about locker 309, about why no one seemed to remember what I remembered. Mr. Dreyfus called it disruptive behavior. I called it not letting things go. They didn't send me to the regular detention room. They sent me to the old wing, the one that had been closed off years ago after a fire. They said it was temporary, that the main detention room was under renovation. But when I got there, the hallway was dark, the air stale and heavy, like no one had walked it in years. Lockers warped with heat damage lined the walls, their paint blistered and peeled. A burned bulletin board still clung to a single curled flyer for a dance that never happened. Room 3B was the only one unlocked. I stepped inside, expecting at least a teacher to be there. But the desk was empty. Dust swirled in the light, cutting through a cracked window. I sat down, trying not to breathe too deeply. It smelled like ash and something older, something that clung to the back of my throat. The clock ticked. The minutes crawled. Then I heard it. Click-clack, click-clack, typing, slow at first, then faster. The sound of a typewriter, distinct, mechanical, deliberate. It wasn't coming from the hall or another room. It came from the supply closet behind the teacher's desk, a closet that was boarded up with thick wooden planks nailed from the outside. I froze, barely breathing. The typing continued, like someone inside was furiously racing against time. I crept forward, each step careful, the floor groaning under me. I crouched near the closet and leaned in. There was a narrow split between two of the boards, wide enough to glimpse the dark inside. At first, I saw nothing, just shadow. But then a flicker of movement, a silhouette. Small shoulders hunched forward, the outline of fingers moving fast over keys. The girl was typing in the dark, no light, no desk, just her and the rhythmic clatter of the typewriter. I whispered, "Hello?" She stopped. The typing ceased instantly, as if she'd been caught. But she didn't look up. She just sat there, still. I backed away. When the final bell rang, I practically ran from the room. The next day, during lunch, I made an excuse and slipped back down the old hallway. I needed to see it again, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. But the moment I reached room 3B, I stopped cold. The supply closet was no longer boarded up. It was gone entirely. In its place was a smooth, solid wall. Fresh brickwork sealed tightly where the closet had been. No seam, no gap, no sign it had ever been any different. No sign anyone had ever been inside. But I knew what I saw. And somewhere, behind that new wall, I could still hear the faint click-clack of unseen keys echoing in my head. It started with a sound I wasn't supposed to hear. Every day, the school bell rings like clockwork. 7:55, 9:30, 11:15, 1:05, 2:45. Always the same sterile tone, hollow and flat. But last Thursday, at exactly 2:14 p.m., something different happened. I was in English, half asleep over Macbeth, when the usual buzz of the intercom went quiet. And then another chime rang. Not the normal school bell. This one was lower, richer, almost melodic, like a tuning fork struck in a deep tunnel. It echoed too long, like it came from somewhere far beneath the floor. I looked around the classroom. No one moved. No one noticed. I raised my hand. "Did anyone else hear that?" Mr. Fields blinked at me. "Hear what?" "The extra bell, just now." The class stared. Some snickered. "There was no bell," he said, already turning back to the whiteboard. But I knew what I'd heard. And what unsettled me more was how familiar it had felt. Like something I'd heard before in a dream I couldn't fully recall. That night, I dug out the oldest yearbook I could find from the library archives 5 years back. On a whim, I searched for Ava Merrill. No photo, but someone had scratched a number next to one of the blank student portraits, 214. I flipped through the pages. That same number appeared again and again, etched faintly into the margins beside a handful of students' names, all listed as transferred or simply gone. No explanation. I pulled the next year's book. Same thing. Different names, same number. Every one of them had disappeared, and every one of them had 214 marked next to their name. The next day, I came prepared. I borrowed a small digital recorder from the AV room and clipped it to my backpack strap. I waited, tense, as the clock approached 2:14 p.m. When the moment hit, it rang again, that strange resonant chime. My skin prickled. I didn't even look around this time. I just waited, frozen, until it ended. That night in my room, I played it back. The first part matched perfectly, the low bell tone vibrating with eerie clarity. But then under the sound, something else began to form. A voice. It whispered my name, clear, slow, deliberate. "You hear me now?" I dropped the recorder. It clattered to the floor, still playing, looping that whisper over and over. I backed away until I hit the wall, breath ragged, because I hadn't told anyone I was recording. No one had said my name in class. Whatever that voice was, it wasn't coming from anyone in the room. It was meant for me, and I think it knew I was listening. It started with a textbook, dusty, brittle, and barely hanging together by the spine. I found it in the return bin at the library, wedged beneath a stack of outdated science manuals. I almost didn't notice the name scribbled inside the front cover, but something made me check. Ava Merrill. The handwriting was neat, a little slanted, like she'd been careful with it. Below her name was something taped into the page, an old paper library card pocket, and just barely visible behind the yellowed plastic sleeve, a small metal key. I slid it out. On the tag, written in faded marker, BLVL, basement level. Except our school didn't have one, at least not according to the blueprints hanging in the front office. I checked them myself the week before, pretending to do a project on school architecture. Nothing below ground, no basement, no sublevels, just concrete slab and dirt. But that key said otherwise. That night, I waited until after everyone had cleared out. Custodians, coaches, lake club kids. Then I slipped into the janitor's office. The door was locked, but I'd learned where Mr. Kent kept the spare key, tucked behind the fire extinguisher in the stairwell. Inside, the office was cramped and musty, a tangle of mop handles, dusty uniforms, and unlabeled keys hanging like forgotten teeth on the back wall. But in the far corner, half hidden behind a rolling trash bin, I found it. A metal panel slightly discolored from the rest of the wall. I pressed on it. It clicked. A small door swung open, revealing an old-fashioned elevator button marked only with the letters BLVL. I held my breath, slid the key into the slot beneath it, and turned. The elevator roared to life like something being shaken from the dead. I stepped in. The light inside flickered as the doors rattled shut behind me. The descent felt too long. There were no indicators, no numbers lighting up, just the slow grinding noise of old cables groaning with age. And then silence. The doors opened to a hallway of concrete and echo. The floor was tiled, the lights dim and flickering with a sickly yellow glow. I followed the corridor until I found a door labeled simply Room B1. It was open. Inside was a classroom frozen in time. Not abandoned, preserved. Every chair was perfectly placed, some slightly pushed out like students had just stood up. Papers sat untouched on desks. Notes filled the blackboard in perfect chalk handwriting. A half-erased date in the corner read October 11th, 1998. No dust, no decay, just stillness. And then the blackboard changed. I watched the chalk lift, like held by an invisible hand, and scratch across the surface with a grating hiss. Who else remembers? The message held there, glowing faintly in the dim light. My breath clouded in the air. The room had gone cold. Suddenly, I felt something shift behind me, just a whisper of movement. I turned, but the hallway was empty. Still, I heard something, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming a desk. or someone waiting. I left quickly, heart hammering, the key clenched in my hand so tightly it left a mark. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but deep down, I knew I would, because that room wasn't just waiting, it was remembering. At first, I thought they were dreams, little flashes, moments that didn't belong to me. I'd blink, and suddenly, I was somewhere else, not just imagining it, living it. A locker slamming shut too hard, cold tile against my back, whispers behind cupped hands that fell silent the moment I looked up. They were Ava's memories. I could feel it, the panic sitting under her skin, the way the school hallways narrowed when she walked them, the constant weight in her chest like the whole place wanted her to disappear. And slowly, it was working. Each time the memory ended, I felt less anchored. I passed a mirror in the bathroom and saw my reflection flicker, then vanish altogether for half a second. The next day, it didn't blink back at all, just stayed black, like the glass had forgotten me, like I wasn't there. Then Jamie walked right past me in the cafeteria. She didn't say hi, didn't look up. I called her name, twice. She turned to a table across the room and asked someone, "Hey, did a new kid start this week?" They shook their head. She shrugged. Weird. I thought I heard a voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone screen refused to unlock with my face. My name was missing from the attendance portal. My student ID, once printed with crisp letters, now read only TBD. The school was rewriting me. I went back to the old wing, to the bricked-up closet. I had to know, had to see it again. I pressed my palm to the wall and closed my eyes. And then I was her, trapped in the dark. I saw it from her eyes, the day it happened. Her books knocked from her arms, the laughter, the dare, the click of the closet door locking. Just a joke, someone had said from the other side. Only they never came back. The air had grown thin. She'd screamed for hours, then stopped, because no one had heard her, because no one wanted to. I gasped back into my body like surfacing from deep water. My knees buckled. I couldn't stop shaking. The walls around me felt too close, the lights too dim. And when I looked in the window of the science lab door, there was no one staring back. That's when I knew. The school wasn't just haunted by Ava. It was feeding on her. And now it was finishing the process with me. Because someone had to remember. And someone always had to take her place. I wasn't supposed to remember. But by now, it's too late to forget. Everything pointed here, from the bell that rang at 2:14 to the whispers from behind the wall, from the bricked-up closet to the frozen classroom below the school. Every thread led to a place none of the staff acknowledged and none of the blueprints showed. A room whispered about in fragments. Room 214. It was supposed to have burned down during the fire years ago. Structural damage, they said. Condemned. But fires don't seal doors shut from the inside, and they don't leave clean brass numbers gleaming on a door behind the auditorium. I found it late one afternoon when the halls were empty and the last bell had already echoed away. The old service corridor behind the stage felt like it hadn't been touched in decades. Layers of dust, forgotten props, the smell of singed wood still clinging to the air. But the door was untouched. No soot, no scorch marks, just the number, 214. I reached for the handle. It turned easily. The room was cold and dark. Not the kind of dark that comes from a lack of light, but the kind that feels alive, like it watches you. Rows of students stood facing the wall, silent, motionless, each one dressed in clothes that looked wrong, outdated, stained, Familiar. I knew their names. I'd seen their photos in the yearbooks, the ones marked with 214 beside them, the ones who'd vanished without explanation. They were all here. And then one of them moved, not their body, just their mouth. A whisper so faint I almost didn't hear it. Remember? Then the others joined in. Remember, remember. Their voices didn't echo. They just soaked into the air like fog. And then one of them turned, a girl with a pale face, wide eyes, and a name I'd never be allowed to forget now. Avenue. She didn't look angry or sad. She looked tired. "You found it," she said softly. "You heard me." My throat closed. I couldn't speak. Ava stepped closer. "Now you remember." Her voice was calm. "That means you stay." The door slammed behind me with a final metallic thud. I ran to it, pounded on it, screamed, but the sound died in my throat like the room absorbed it. I turned around, and the students were closer now, still facing the wall, still whispering. I was one of them. My name, whatever it was, slipped from memory even as I tried to say it aloud. The lights faded, and somewhere far above, on the first floor in a different season, a new student stepped onto campus. They smiled nervously, holding their schedule, looking for their locker. They found it at the end of the hall. The number was clear, etched freshly in silver, 309. Inside, tucked between the dividers, was a folded piece of lined paper, just a single sentence written in perfect, slanted handwriting. "Tell them I'm still here,"